There is knowledge that does not come from books, is not built from an existing theoretical system, but is opened from the experience and deep perception of an individual. That knowledge is not just a combination of philosophical science or spirituality, but the convergence of all to surpass all three fields. That is the knowledge system of Nalanda. One of the most daring thoughts about the nature of spiritual reality and the path of human transformation, different from traditional knowledge systems that clearly divide between materialism and idealism. Between science and spirituality, Nalanda's thought unifies everything into one whole. He calls it two truths. One is the truth about the universe, the other is the truth about enlightenment. The truth about the universe is not simply a physical description, but includes the nature of matter-energy information and their movements. Meanwhile, the truth about enlightenment is not only spiritual enlightenment, but also the process of humans realizing their true nature and restructuring cognition and transcending the limits of the mind. The special thing about Nalanda's thought is the way he approaches knowledge as a dynamic process rather than a fixed system. He does not assert that what he says is an immutable truth, but always emphasizes that knowledge must be experienced and proven. This is the reason why those who approach his thought are not asked to believe blindly but must verify it themselves through practice. Why can this system of knowledge change human perception? Because it not only helps us understand the outside world, but also helps us see through ourselves. According to Nalanda, humans are not just a biological entity programmed to operate according to biochemical reflexes in the brain. Humans are a form of information, a structure of consciousness that operates according to principles beyond the understanding of modern science. And if we understand this nature correctly, humans can reprogram their perception, free themselves from the limitations of old thinking, and experience the world in a completely new way. There is a key point in Nalanda's thought. He did not believe that enlightenment was a mystical state reserved only for saints or those who have practiced for a lifetime. He believed that enlightenment was a process that could be done right in the present life by changing one's perception and recoding one's own thoughts. Enlightenment in this way is no longer a distant thing but becomes a practical path, something that anyone can achieve if they understand its operating principles correctly. So if humans are just a collection of material molecules, if consciousness is just a product of bioelectrical reactions in the brain, then why do we have moments when we feel connected to something beyond the physical body? Why do we have experiences that cannot be explained by pure science? And if humans are just biological organisms, where does consciousness come from in the Nalanda system of knowledge? Reality is not simply what we can see, touch, or measure with physical instruments. Reality is not fixed, is not a physical world operates according to inevitable laws, but is a flow of information that can transform. Everything exists not as static blocks of matter, but as subtle units of information, a constantly oscillating network. According to him, man is not just a physical entity, but also a cognitive system where consciousness is not a product of the brain, but a larger information field that interacts with reality in ways that humans have not yet fully understood. So what determines an individual's perception? What makes people have a different way of experiencing the world? The answer lies in the way the brain decodes reality. According to Nalanda, human consciousness is not a fixed entity, but a continuous process that takes place based on receiving, processing, and interpreting information from the surrounding world. When people look at an object, They do not actually see that object, but only see a version of it that has been processed by the brain. Everything we experience, images, sounds, feelings are not objective reality, but a model that the mind builds to understand reality. This means that the world that people live in is not the real world, but just a personalized version of reality according to how they perceive it from this perspective. Perception is not just a tool for people to observe the world, but the very factor that shapes the world when a person changes the way they perceive reality. The world they live in also changes if they believe that life is full of suffering, injustice, chaos. Then they will only see those things everywhere. But if they expand their perception, if they stop giving the world fixed definitions, they will realize that reality does not have meaning in itself. Meaning only exists when someone interprets it. But if reality is just information, then is consciousness also just an information processing process? Consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but an independent entity that exists outside the physical structure of the human brain. Does not create consciousness. It is just a tool for consciousness interacting with the physical world. This is like a radio. It does not produce music, but is just a means to catch the waves and emit sound. If the brain is damaged, the human ability to process information can be affected, but the consciousness itself still exists independently of the brain. And it is from here that the concept of the soul comes. Nalanda did not see the soul as an unchanging entity that persists through many lifetimes in the way that many traditional religions describe it. Instead, he believed that the soul is an information structure that can change, can be reprogrammed, can expand or be degraded depending on how a person uses their consciousness. When a person lives in a state of ignorance controlled by emotions and unconscious thoughts, they are not actually operating their consciousness actively, but are just reacting to old programs programmed in the subconscious. This makes their soul unable to develop, unable to expand, to receive higher levels of awareness. On the contrary, when a person begins to understand how awareness works, when they observe the world without being distorted by the mind, when they stop clinging to old definitions, they begin to expand their consciousness. But what happens when a person is able to expand their consciousness? They begin to realize that they are not their thoughts, not their fleeting emotions, not the identity that society has imposed on them. They begin to see that everything they have believed about themselves, about life, about the world, are actually just stories that they have accepted as true. And when they see through those layers of illusion, a new state of consciousness emerges where they are no longer bound by any beliefs, no longer controlled by the past or worried about the future, but simply pure, clear awareness, unclouded by the mind. So what does this mean for humans? It means that reality is not something that is fixed, that humans are forced to accept. It means that the world is not an immutable place with unchangeable laws. It means that humans can change how they experience the world by changing their own perception. But this does not mean that people need to believe anything that is said. The only thing they need to do is to verify it for themselves. In short, consciousness is not a product of the brain, but an independent entity, an information field that can expand or be limited depending on how people use it. The soul is not an immutable entity, but a system that can change, can evolve or decay. Reality is not an absolute physical world, but a flow of information that can be interpreted in countless different ways. And most importantly, humans are not limited to any one cognitive model if they are brave enough to let go of what they have believed. They can see a completely different reality, a world they have never really seen before. So if consciousness is not a product of the brain, if reality is not fixed but just a flow of information that can be interpreted in countless ways, then what determines how a person actually experiences the world is the difference not in reality itself, but in how humans perceive it. And if the mind can create a model of the world, then is there a state of consciousness that transcends thought patterns where humans can see things as they really are without being distorted by prejudice and emotions? This is the essence of enlightenment, not a mystical concept, but a transformation in the way humans perceive reality. Enlightenment is not a distant destination or a special state reserved for a few. It is a progression. The process can take place right in this life, right in the present awareness of a person. It is not a mystical experience or a sudden enlightenment, but a profound change in the way a person perceives his own reality and the world around him. The core of enlightenment does not lie in the pursuit of lofty knowledge, but in the ability to realize the true nature of everything. The reality that a person is experiencing is not a fixed world, but a series of information that they have been programmed to believe is true from birth. People do not have any concept of themselves or the world. All are formed through the process of receiving information from the environment. But because they are too familiar with this information, they confuse it with the truth and thereby create a reality distorted by prejudice, beliefs, and inherent thought patterns. Enlightenment, according to Nalanda, is not about learning more, but the process of removing layers of false perceptions that have accumulated over time. It is not a supernatural state or an attainment, which is letting go of the illusions that people have been clinging to for so long. When a person can see the world without being bound by preconceived notions, they enter a state that Nalanda calls pure awareness. Pure awareness is not a new form of knowledge, but a release from the constraints of thinking. An unenlightened person, when seeing an event happening, will immediately interpret it based on their pre-existing experiences and views. If they fail, they may think it is a sign of incompetence. If someone gets angry at them, they may think that the person hates them, but to a person who has reached pure awareness, they simply see the event happening without imposing any meaning on it. A failure is just a neutral event, and anger is just a temporary state. There is no fear, no defense, no long complex chains of thoughts. And it is in this state that a person can truly see the world and see themselves clearly. However, pure awareness does not mean indifference or apathy. An enlightened person is not someone who is detached from life, but someone who lives fully in it. When they are no longer controlled by the mind, they perceive things more authentically than ever. A flower is no longer just a concept, but a living entity. A conversation is no longer clouded by analytical thoughts, but becomes a moment of true connection. Life becomes clearer and sharper because the mind is no longer disturbing reality by layers of interpretation and automatic reaction. Enlightenment does not mean that a person becomes a separate individual from the world. On the contrary, when a person reaches this state, they feel more deeply connected to everything around them. They no longer see others through the lens of your ego, but see their true nature. They no longer react to life with old programming, but live with complete freedom and awareness. And from there, they not only change themselves, but also impact those around them naturally. Not through words or teachings, but through their very presence. Enlightenment, according to Nalanda, is not a transcendent state reserved for those with high cultivation, but a natural process that anyone can experience. If they are willing to look back at themselves, Remove the layers of illusions that have accumulated for a long time and live with awareness not bound by old concepts. It is not something to pursue, but something to realize, because it is always there waiting for you. People who are awake enough to see with philosophy of mind. Knowledge is only truly valuable when it can change the way people live, think, and interact with the world, no matter how complete a system is. If it only stops at theory, it cannot help people escape suffering or expand their awareness. Nalanda did not build a knowledge to be worshipped or remembered, but to be used if understood correctly and applied correctly. People can escape old thinking cycles, change the way they react to life, reprogram their awareness, and from there create a new reality that is no longer bound by the limitations they themselves create. The most important application of this knowledge system is to help people escape the constraints of the mind and emotions in daily life. Most people are caught up in negative thoughts and emotions without realizing that they can choose how to react. Invisible fears, social pressures, personal expectations, all of these things make people caught up in an endless cycle of reaction. They react out of habit. They run after their emotions without really controlling themselves. But when they understand that thoughts and emotions are not their true nature, when they know how to observe them instead of letting them control them, people can separate themselves from these unconscious loops. When a person is no longer controlled by thoughts and emotions, they are no longer dragged by anger, no longer manipulated by anxiety, no longer obsessed with things they cannot control. Instead, they can see everything with clarity and calmness, and when they reach this state, their lives change in unexpected ways. But getting out of the control of the mind is only part one of the most powerful applications of this. Knowledge is to help people restructure their thinking to make better decisions in today's society. People make decisions based on many factors that do not really belong to them. They are influenced by family expectations, social pressure, cultural prejudices, pre-established standards. They follow what others think right without really asking what is truly right for them. When a person can see things without being influenced by external factors, they can make decisions based on their inner wisdom and intuition instead of based on fear or pressure. They stop following what they should and instead follow what truly brings value and meaning. And when they do that, their life is no longer driven by factors beyond their control, but becomes a proactive process where they can truly build their own path. The next application is in human relationships. Most conflicts in life stem from misunderstandings, from unconscious reactions, from unmet needs. When a person is driven by ego, they don't really listen to the other person. They are just waiting for their turn to speak. They don't really see the other person. They are just interpreting things based on their own perspective. This creates invisible barriers that keep people apart. But when someone who can peel back layers of thought program, they no longer see others through the lens of their ego. They can listen fully. They can understand without imposing. They can connect without controlling or possessing. When many people realize that they are no longer controlled by old thought patterns, that they can create their own reality by changing the way they see the world, then society also changes. Old systems, outdated rules, barriers to growth can all be replaced by a new approach. A society where people can live with awareness, no longer driven by fear and blind ambition, will be a society where everything operates on understanding, not on forced conditions. All of this is not just a change in the way of thinking, but a complete shift in the way people experience reality. When a person begins to apply this knowledge, they not only break free from old thought patterns, but also open up a whole new space of perception. but to real change happens. Knowledge alone is not enough. It needs to be practiced and verified in everyday life. So how can one truly experience and apply pure awareness in every moment? How to move from someone who only knows this knowledge to someone who lives it fully? The practice of pure awareness does not require one to separate oneself from the present life or enter into deep meditative states. It does not require an ascetic life or giving up ordinary activities. On the contrary, this practice can take place right in the midst of all aspects of life in the most ordinary moments. The important thing is not what you do, but how you perceive what is happening. The first step in this practice is to learn to observe without reacting. People are used to reacting immediately to everything that happens around them. When someone says something that hurts them, they react with anger when they fail. They immediately feel disappointed and discouraged when faced with something undesirable. They immediately try to resist or avoid. But if you stop for a moment, if you simply observe what is happening instead of reacting out of habit, they will begin to realize one thing. Every thought, every emotion is just a passing signal in the mind. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is forced to stick to themselves. For example, when someone insults you, your natural reaction might be anger or hurt. But if you just stop and observe, you will realize that the words do not really have power over you unless you choose to let it have an effect. If you do not cling to the emotion of being offended, it simply passes like the wind. But if you let your mind grasp it, you will be pulled into a never-ending emotional spiral. The practice of pure awareness is learning to observe without being caught up in order to experience life clearly without being disturbed by the mind. The next step is to practice inner stillness. The outside world is always noisy. There are always thousands of things that pull people into a state of stress, anxiety, fear. But in reality, chaos is not in the outside world, but in how people react to it. One person can sit in a quiet room and still be filled with anxiety and chaotic thoughts, while another person can stand in the middle of a crowd and still maintain inner stillness. The difference lies in the ability to not let yourself be dominated by what is happening outside. There is a simple way to practice this. Take a short time during the day to just observe without judgment while walking. Just feel each step instead of thinking about what to do. When eating, just taste the taste instead of letting your mind wander into other thoughts. When talking, just listen. Instead of rushing to think about what you are going to say next, when one can live in the present moment without getting caught up in the interpretations of the mind, one begins to feel true. Silence, in short, the practice of pure awareness is not a technique, not a doctrine, not something to pursue. It is simply learning to see things as they are, not adding to it. Judgments not being dominated by the mind. And when one can do that, one will find that freedom, peace, enlightenment, all the things one has been searching for have actually always been there right in front of one's eyes. The Nalanda system of knowledge is not an abstract theory or an imposed belief system, but a new way of looking at the universe, human beings, and reality. It is not opposed to science, but also not limited by current science. It is not a religion, but it is not separate from the big questions that religion has raised. The most important thing that this ideology brings is not a system of concepts to memorize, but a practical method to help people change their perception, expand their thinking, and freely escape their own limitations. But knowledge, no matter how profound, is just a door that opens up possibilities, and whether to step through or not depends entirely on each individual. There is no path that is absolutely right. No system is perfect, only practical experience determines the value of knowledge. So the most important question is not whether this ideology is right or not, but whether you are willing to verify it yourself, and if you really dare to experiment, dare to look at things with a new perception, you will probably see that reality has never been fixed, but always waiting to be discovered. This is an analysis and interpretation from the perspective of Triyat Tam, based on the thinking system of Nalanda, but expanded and developed in a separate approach. Thank you. You have accompanied Triyat Tam. If you find this content useful, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share to spread knowledge. Wish you and your family peace and happiness.